Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Sabeeha Rehman.
And I'm Walter Ruby.
I am an American Muslim.
And I'm an American Jew.
And we refuse to be enemies.
We absolutely do.
Today, we have a change in our format. Instead of a guest on our show, I will be interviewing Walter on the issue of Zionism. So let's get started. Walter, on June 7, you published a piece in the foreword titled, "It's Time for Jews Who Love Israel to Give Up on Zionism." Let me repeat. It's time for Jews who love Israel to give up on Zionism. It has generated quite the attention. Why did you decide to write and publish this article?
Well, after a lot of soul searching, Sabeeha, which I'll talk about, but my motivation was that I realized that there are many American Jews, including myself, who've been feeling homeless and bereft because we're no longer able to call ourselves Zionists after the genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza and the West Bank and southern Lebanon and the attack on Iran. But we are also not in concert with the demonization of Israel and Israelis by much of the pro-Palestine movement, including Jewish Voice for Peace and others. So we're calling ourselves post-Zionists, and I'll be trying to flesh that out in this conversation. Mm-hmm. But let me just say at the outset that we post-Zionists love Israel, warts and all, and we want to save it, not make it disappear. We want to save it by dropping an ideology, namely Zionism, that from its outset has been about the domination of the land of Israel-Palestine, the land between the river and the sea, rather than finding a way to live there side by side, Israelis and Palestinians together in our shared land with peace, security, and political and human rights and self-determination for all. That needs to be the vision going forward. Now, what political form that takes, whether it's one state, two states, or my personal favorite, a confederation between a Jewish state and a Palestinian state with an overarching EU-like government, let's say, but whatever that is, it's less important than getting people to embrace an ideology of cooperation and nurturing the land together, rather than an ideology of us against them, which we've had since the very beginning.
I like your choice of words, nurturing the land together.
Thank you.
You start the piece in the foreword by saying that you did not leave democratic Zionism, but democratic Zionism left you. What do you mean by that?
Well, they found that Israel itself effectively abandoned Zionism, or what I call democratic Zionism, which was based on a vision articulated in the Israeli Declaration of Independence on May 14, 1948, which promised a Jewish state of Israel that would, quote, ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all of its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. But the hard truth is that never happened. Never happened even on one day since Israel's creation on May 14, 1948. First of all, 750,000 Palestinian Arabs were driven out during the Nakba, during what Palestinians call the Nakba, the Israelis call the War of Independence. And
Nakba meaning catastrophe.
That's right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you. And of, I think, around 100,000 Palestinians who were left inside of Israel's new borders after 48, they ended up living under curfew for the next 18 years. So hardly a manifestation of equality for all citizens of Israel. Mm. And then after 1967, after the 1967 Six-Day War, when Israel took over East Jerusalem and the West Bank and Gaza, several million Palestinians were held and continue to be held after nearly 60 years as a subject population without rights, while Israel increasingly flooded the occupied territories with settlements, with Jewish settlements. And this ongoing action, which I call the settlement project, was carried out by both Zionist left and right parties alike, whoever was in power, for over half a century. And every government of Israel has continued to build these settlements for, as I say, almost 60 years. And that eventually, that whole effort has gotten to the point now to today where you have nearly 1 million Jews living in Palestinian areas, which I would in East Jerusalem as well as the West Bank, and well, not right now in Gaza, but we know what's happening in Gaza. We'll talk about that more. And so this whole effort made a Palestinian state alongside Israel almost impossible, ensuring instead an apartheid Israeli Jewish domination of the whole land, um, with a Palestinian population equal to the number of Jews, but most of them living without any rights at all. So you have Palestinian Israeli citizens with lesser rights, and then you have a larger group in the West Bank and Gaza with basically no rights, and their lives completely dominated by Israel. So I think it's time not enough people are really grappling with this issue that Israel itself killed democratic Zionism. That is a harsh truth that needs to be said repeatedly out loud, and it needs to be pondered, and the implications of that need to be dealt with. But, if that is true, and I believe it is, the question then becomes why, say, American Jews, like myself and so many others here, should be more Catholic than the Pope or more Zionist than Bibi Netanyahu. Why should we be such suckers and such enablers of a grave injustice that is destructive of both Palestinians and Israelis? And we've been doing that, enabling this whole process through political action here in America, through AIPAC and other groups that have been impacting the US political process for decades and have basically compelled a US policy that has allowed this to continue. So this has really been a deep wrong that we American Jews have committed, the American Jewish community. And so and I think that has to be grappled with, that certainly the Israelis did what they did, but we made it possible. And so like our Israeli brothers and sisters, we have a moral obligation to end this now.
So, Walter, what you have just explained about what was in the Israeli Declaration of Independence raises the question in my mind. Can you explain the origins of Zionism and what it intended to achieve?
Okay, so to really get a handle on the origins of Zionism, we have to go back to the late 19th century, to a time when the majority of Jews were living in an area of in Eastern Europe. The majority of, I would say, Ashkenazi Jews, but that was a majority of Jews were living in essentially the Russian Empire, Romania, some of the Austria-Hungary, other countries. Poland later on, Poland was part of Russia at that point. Later on, it became independent. In any case, that's where Jews were living, and they were living under severe discrimination and even violence, certainly in the Russian Empire. The infamous pogroms that occurred against Jews in places like Kishinev and Kiev and all of those things. So living in these really miserable conditions and being held back and prevented from being full members of their societies really stimulated. I mean, basically, Jews were in ferment at that time, I would say. And some of them became socialists and then communists and played a big role in the Soviet Union and the Soviet, the move toward that whole communist piece. Others went deeper into religion. Many millions came to America, fled to America, and that's my father's family and millions of others. A smaller number became Zionists, and their idea, the dream, was to return to our ancestral homeland from which Jews had been driven out by the Romans in the year 70 AD, when they destroyed the Second Temple, and the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. And then there was a second time 60 years later during the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Anyway, after those two, I would say, bloodlettings by the, really brutal repression by the Romans, killing of, many thousands of Jews, the Jewish population, much of the Jewish population had to leave what was then, Eretz Israel. Became, was also the Roman name was Palestine, and were, scattered around the world. So by the time of by the late 19th century, the number of Jews in Israel Palestine was really quite low, and but the dream was of this thing was to go back. Let's go back. Let's resettle our land. Let's make it. Let's make the land bloom. All of those things. Let's create our own, but let's be in control of our own lives, our own, self-determination. Let's have Jewish self-determination in our homeland. And it was in many ways a profoundly liberating ideology for the Jews. And I often think that if I had been alive then, I probably would have been supporting it. I would have, and I had, as you know, Sabeeha, I had the privilege of living in Israel as a child for a year in Rehovot. And for me, I did have the opportunity to sort of take part in that building of the land and just feeling what that felt like and how affirming it was. So all to the good, except there was one fatal flaw that was there from day one, which is that how do you create? Because right away, when the Zionist movement set its goal at the first Zionist Congress of 1897, is that we're going to build a Jewish state, and that was the goal. And the question from the beginning was or should have been, how do you create a Jewish state in a land that, at the time of that first Jewish Zionist Congress of 1897, was, I think, 7% Jewish, basically. The whole population of Palestine between the river and the sea was 7% Jewish, and close to more than 90% Palestinian Arab, you would say. And by after the Balfour Declaration at the end in World War I, kind of stimulated. The British then took over and they kind of opened Palestine for Jewish settlement in the 20s and 30s. So let's say by the late 30s, maybe a third of the population was Jewish, including many German Jews who were fleeing Hitler. But it was a minority. So how can you do that? And they had finally they had a famous line many people know today, that it was going to be a land without a people for a people without a land. But obviously, that was self-delusion from the very beginning, because it was not a land without a people.
Right.
You always had this Palestinian Arab majority. And so even though Zionism seemed, and to me it seemed as a young person, like a progressive movement with a secular socialist ethic, and so forth, I believe it was always bound to lead, as things went along, as the conflict festered and many wars and all of that, leading to a kind of what we have today, an extreme ethno-nationalism, and which has really driven both peoples into a morass. And so that's why we really need to drop now the concept of Zionism to build a new and vibrant Israel-Palestine. And I'll just say one last thing that I do want to stress, because I think it's important. Israelis are so demonized today, and I think part through the pro-Palestine movement. There's many good things about the pro-Palestine movement, but I don't think the demonization of Israelis is helpful at all. Comparing Israel basically with another, with Nazism. Again, because just to share. And yeah, I should say one thing that some of the for example, Jewish Voice for Peace and others are extolling the idea of the Jewish Socialist Bund, which was created in Poland and Lithuania in the 1920s and 30s. Wonderful movement, wonderful people, and they were saying that's a better model than Zionism. But the fact is that almost everyone who was a member of the Social Zionist Bund who did stay in Poland was killed by the Nazis in World War II. So that model didn't work. And my own mother was fleeing from Germany, as you know, and ended up in the south of France in 1940, desperately trying to get a boat to Palestine, later to the US, because she couldn't get to Palestine. The British at that point were blockading Palestine. So, but those Jews who did go to Palestine in the 30s, they survived, and they, those were Zionists. So it's a bit too simplistic to say good guys and bad guys. Palestinians are all good guys, Israelis are bad guys, and what we just need to do is get rid of Israel.
Walter, something you said, which I found quite striking, is that initially it was just a small number, a small group that raised the concept of Zionism. So let me ask you, did Israel intend to accord equality to its non-Jewish citizens, or did this idea unravel over time?
I don't think Israel ever, or the people who were building the Jewish state before it became Israel in the 20s and 30s, whether it was the Labor Party of David Ben-Gurion or whether it was the Revisionist Party of Jabotinsky. One was supposedly to the left, one to the right, but neither of them ever conceived of a state of true equality. So I have to, and one can see that in many ways. But the point is, what was this? So why did they have this Declaration of Independence? Why would they say that?
Yeah.
And I have to conclude that it was really a brilliant PR exercise. And it worked beautifully, because for decades it hid the truth that Israel, in fact, never intended to accord equality to its non-Jewish citizens. And how do we know that? We can see it by the historic record, as I said earlier. What happened between 1948 and 1966? What happened after 1967?
Yeah.
If Israel really was ever serious about a full equality, that something would have been done, but nothing ever was. Now, after 1948, obviously terrible things happened. The Nakba happened, but Zionism could say, or Zionists could say after 1948, well, it succeeded. Zionism worked. We created the Jewish state. That did work. And here we are. Now maybe it's time to, since Zionism already is mission accomplished, why not just put it aside and go to a new kind of Israel where you would work on, first of all, you've got what was the main problem that Israel had in 1949 and it has still today, is how does it become accepted in the larger Middle East that it's surrounded by, and is surrounded by much, much larger numbers of Arabs and Muslims and Christians, well, much more Muslim
and Palestinian refugees.
Thank you. So you can't, basically, so that would have been, I think, the right thing to have done, to have said, okay, now that's done. Let's figure out a way. Maybe we accept a certain number of Palestinian refugees coming back and pay reparations to the others. We express deep regret for what happened during the war, and try ways to end the conflict. But instead, we just doubled down on it and kind of continued the mentality that existed in the pre-state. In this pre-state, there was a whole thing about building the Jewish state piece by piece, one little thing today. They used to say we're going to build another chicken coop on such and such kibbutz today, and tomorrow we're going to put a chicken coop or a children's house in that kibbutz, and that was called, that was the kind of the way of building of settling the land before 1948. But then you come back, but that should have been retired, because when you came back, suddenly it was still there. And then after 1967, the new settler movement, which was much more religious, much more nationalistic than the first one, they readopted that credo. We're going to build one more chicken coop in one of these West Bank settlements, and essentially that's continued the whole thing.
Yeah. Some people argue that Zionism is irrelevant to the main issue, which you define as focusing on supporting efforts to build a shared society in which all the people residing between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, Israelis and Palestinians alike, can live side by side in peace and security. So why do you believe that it's important to call on Israelis to drop Zionism?
Well, that's a good question. It's one I struggled with because, as you know, Sabi, I've been involved
Yeah,
in
sure. Yeah.
Project Rosanna, which is
Mhm.
one of many wonderful joint efforts to build a land where people do live in peace and equality. And this is an effort to improve Project Rosanna to improve healthcare inside of Palestine with the support of Israelis. And so the people, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. My life has been greatly enriched by being part of that. But what I've seen is that the people who are directly involved in that work, Jews and Palestinians, they're very close to each other. They've formed very deep
Mhm.
friendships and love each other, I think. And
Yeah.
so they're, you know, when I think of some of those folks, I think, you know, and a couple of them have said to me, well, you know, why concentrate on Zionism at all? It's kind of irrelevant to what we're doing. And I can see that point. However, most of us, and certainly those of us in the
Yeah.
diaspora who
Mhm.
love Israel and wanted to survive, you know, are not necessarily able to be directly engaged in that effort. And I do think that for us, saying out loud that Zionism is a retrograde ideology that you know is an important thing to do right now. It's really needed because again, the American Jewish establishment continues to enforce a kind of a regime, an order, if you will, in our communal and religious life, in which only Zionism is legitimate. And that, you know, and that's so I think that's why it's critical to speak out and say, look, you can love Israel and you want Israel to survive, but not if it continues to hurt another people. We have to make that stop. And the only way to make that stop is to drop an ideology which is about a Jewish state, a state only for the Jews, and we've seen that it doesn't work. It doesn't work in giving equality, and it doesn't work in solving Israel's long-term survival issue because it's
Yeah.
taken us to a place now where you know we're just destroy. I mean, we're like
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
it's kind of mutually assured destruction. And you know and Palestinians who have this expectation, this hope that oh now Israel is going to disappear, are also setting themselves up for more and more and more conflict.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why it has to be. We have to really deal with the you know heart of the matter.
So, on a personal level, you have mentioned to me that you stopped being a Zionist more than 20 years ago,
Yeah.
more than 20 years ago. So, why did it take you so many years to speak out? In fact, you told me that publishing this piece in Forward feels to you like diving off the Niagara Falls without knowing whether there would be a net at the bottom. Talk about that.
Well, Sabeeha, as you know, because I've talked to you about it over the last few months, it's been very, very hard. It was very hard to write the piece and then you know, and
I
then to
bet.
publish it.
I bet.
And
It's painful.
yes,
Yeah.
and so you know, but why?
Mhm.
I guess because my life has been about Israel. As I was a journalist for Israeli and Jewish newspapers for the first half of my life. I then worked in Muslim Jewish relations for the last well, almost 20 years. So all of that together, I mean, since the 1970s, basically, that's been my bread and butter. That's what I do, and I'm part of this community of the larger Jewish community in many
Yeah.
ways. Even though I've been critical. I've not you know I've not completely you know not said anything, but saying I'm no longer a Zionist is a big step,
Yeah.
it was really scary. So I was
I remember that you
yes,
struggled with this when we were writing our book, We Refuse to Be
yes,
Enemies.
thank you.
You put it in, you took it out, you weren't
Yes.
ready. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of it was, and I think I probably it was the right decision then because as I
Then,
told you at the
yeah.
time, if I
And
had
we're
kept
talking
it in,
2021.
right.
Yeah.
We wanted to go out and give as many lectures as we could and get the word out about our book. And it was about, you know, the
Mhm.
importance of building Muslim-Jewish relations. I was very afraid that if I had put that into the book at that point, it would have caused many Jews, many Jewish, many synagogues, for example, not to host us, liberal synagogues. and so forth.
It
So
would have become the dominant issue.
it would have, and
Yeah.
it didn't
Instead
feel
of the bring
right.
relationship building. Yeah.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So yeah, so it did. So, but the thing that was the what happened was when I finally, and first of all, the piece was finished about a month ago, but it took 3 weeks for them to actually publish it because things were happening so quickly. And
You mean the forward,
the forward, that's right.
piece.
The
Yeah.
forward didn't. So I was sort of, I felt like I was like poised over Niagara Falls, ready to dive,
Yeah.
but I couldn't dive until they actually published the
Right.
piece.
And the landscape kept shifting under
Exactly.
your
There was
feet,
the Nick Kristoff
Yeah.
piece. There was
Yeah.
a story, the horrible story. So finally, it ran, and I will tell you that within a
You mean the
few.
horrible story about what Nicholas Kristoff
That's right,
mentioned
about
was
the
happening to the
sexual
prisoners? Yeah.
assaults. Yeah, I mean, it was just horrific, and I'm sure mostly true. But when the piece was finally published, it was a Sunday morning, I guess, Sunday morning, June 7th. So I'm home alone, and basically within a few hours, as what I did was I then put it up on Facebook, and I said, I want you folks to know this was, I wrote this, and with deep, what did I say? You know, I can't think of the words I use now.
It's a dilemma. It's a struggle.
I said all of that. I said with a sense of humbleness almost, but I feel this is something that I need to say, that needs to be said, because it's not only about me. I said, but it's so many other people. If it was only about me, then that would be one thing. And I had to. By the way, I needed to be clear in my own head. I needed to think for a long time. Am I just doing this? Is this some kind of personal need? Am I trying to, become famous, or get a little bit more notoriety? Is that what this is about? Or is it just somebody, who wants to be heard, who feels maybe I'm getting a little older and I got to get it. But it wasn't that. It was, I'm sure it was some of that, I have to be honest, but it was mostly that this is a moment. I could feel this happening. I could see, I've spoken to so many Jews over the last few months, and basically since October 7th, who have been moving in this direction and have felt, what do we do? We need a new movement, essentially. And so anyway, to make a very long story short, within I would say 2 hours from the time I first see it in the forward and I put it on Facebook, and then people start responding, and most of the responses was quite positive.
Yeah, that was my next question, which was that, so it's in forward, you posted it on Facebook. How was the reaction? I mean, from the Jewish right, from the Jewish left, from the center,
So
has it affected you personally?
Right. Okay. So just exactly, and I'll respond to that, but just to complete my thought. So it was just amazing how quickly it went from, oh my God, I published this, is what's going to happen. How am I going to, who knows whether the world will end? And then within 2 hours, I'm like, wow, yeah, this is a positive reaction. Let's go for it. Now, how do we create a mass movement? How am I going to, what's my role in this? Who am I going to work with? Those kind of questions. So it went from this to this almost immediately. So it was really one of those things where you pull a Band-Aid off and you're like, oh, why did I leave that hanging there for less than 20 years?
The wound has healed. Yeah.
Right. But to answer your question, yes, that I think many of the people, both in, I would say, on the left, certainly was a very positive reaction, even among people who would still call themselves Zionists. And by the way, I had shared it with both with Project Rosanna before I published it, also with J Street, which I have a role in my own congressional district in Maryland. And both of them, so I said to them, listen, I want you to know that I need to write this. But if you feel this is going to cause problems for either of your organization, let me know. And I may need to step aside, because this is like really paramount, even though I love deeply what I'm doing with Rosanna and with J Street. But both of them were like, that's fine. So that was a big deal, say your piece, we're not necessarily endorsing it.
The timing was right.
The timing was also right. So that was a big deal. You say, what about the Jewish right? Well, the Jewish right was, there was
predictable.
It was predictable. Exactly. It wasn't the first time. I've written other things where people have called me a self-hating Jew, or they've called me, even a traitor to my people. So there were a few of those. But again, I was ready for that. It wasn't like it was my first time dealing with that. The one that I think it did hurt me more. The one thing that was emotionally tough was that there are certain people who are Zionists who I love, people who I'm very, very close to personally. And several of them, I can think of two examples, two dear friends, a woman and a man who I could feel. I mean, the man wrote back explaining to me why he thought I was wrong, but with very respectfully. And the woman did not respond, but I understood she had read it. I know she left a like, but she didn't. Beyond that, she didn't say anything. So I knew that it had probably hurt her a lot. And yeah, and I sort of said to both of them, "I'm sorry. I mean, I love you both, or I love you." I said it separately to them, but I had no choice. I have to speak my truth, and they said, "Of course, we understand." So that's in a sense how it's been.
Yeah. You are positing post-Zionism as a third way between mainstream Zionism and anti-Zionism. Why is such a third way needed? And why do you contend that the strategies of both mainstream Zionists and anti-Zionists are leading both people to mutually assured destruction?
Yeah, I think I've sort of answered that last question just a piece now, but yeah, I think that that the situation we see in front of us now is a lot of screaming, a lot of belligerence on both sides, a lot of hate, and also I have to say anti-Semitism coming up as well as Islamophobia, and both of them are really we need to fight together against rather than. But it has brought all of that up, and then I want to be, careful. I've already been somewhat critical of Jewish Voice for Peace and some of the other groups that have now created something called the Jewish Diaspora Movement, which is a very interesting development. So, I mean, I think many of these people are. I mean, I have to, in the same way that it was hard for me to stop being a Zionist, I'm sure for many of them it was also hard. But the difference is, I think that they have became anti-Zionist, and in a way that I haven't. I've become post-Zionist, and so what does that mean? And they have been JVP, and if not now, and other groups have been very involved in the movements on the campuses, the pro-Palestine movements, and I think in a way that has at least they haven't directly contradicted the movement and said, well, some of what we're hearing here is should the idea of basically getting rid of Israel, I think, is growing, and also that there has been, unfortunately, as I was starting to say, violence against Jews coming out of some of this, and we may see more in the future. Now you can say, as we know, the shooting of two Israeli employees in Washington at a Jewish community event. It's also an attack on Jews in Boulder. There was the horrific incident, the massacre, I should say, in Bondi Beach, Australia. And in Europe and in London, we've seen a whole string of really, attacks on Jews, and much of it coming from people who are at least, again, nobody is telling them go out and do this. I certainly know the pro-Palestine movement is not doing that, but the effect of it is, I think, to stimulate anti-Semitism. And one can say, well, that a lot of that, the blame for that lies with the government of Israel, lies with Netanyahu for following policies that are so horrific and so brutal and so cruel that some anti-Semitism is bound to follow in the wake. But that's also making Jews here in America insecure. So, I guess, yeah, that's a long answer to a good question, which I'm not sure if I fully answered, but go ahead.
So you mentioned Jewish Voices for Peace earlier. I have been inspired over the past 3 years by so many Jews, mostly young, from groups like Jewish Voice for Peace. They fought side by side with Palestinians, Muslims, and others on the pro-Palestinian movement to stop what they call Israel's genocide and ethnic cleansing in Gaza and West Bank, and to stop what's happening in southern Lebanon and massive violence in Iran together with the US. But you are very negative about Jewish Voice for Peace and anti-Zionist in general. Why is that?
Well, I think that, as I said, I don't want to criticize anyone specifically, and I do believe that having taken the stand they took, I have to deeply respect that because it took a lot, you know.
Mhm.
But I can't be with them because I do love Israel, warts and all, as I said. And but the other thing that does bother me about where they're coming from, I think, and is that they're trying to create, and they've done this in very different ways, and you see this in this new Jewish diaspora movement. To create a kind of new Judaism. It's not even that they're saying we're anti-Zionist, but but they want to create a Judaism which is about the diaspora, which is upholding the diaspora and say, Jews should just be play wherever they live. That's great, and that's really the center. And this whole ethno-nationalism thing is a really bad deal. The problem is that
You mean they're more focused on Tikkun Olam
absolutely.
rather than next year in Jerusalem?
Perfect. Thank you for saying it that way. That's exactly right. Now, I personally also am a Tikkun Olam Jew. I'm
Yeah.
not deeply devout, but boy, I got the next year in Jerusalem thing really strongly for whatever reason. I think most Jews the point is that next year in Jerusalem was there long before Zionism. It was, we were saying that in the Passover, Seder going back many hundreds of years, maybe close. I don't know exactly when, but I'm sure back to medieval times. And so the connection, the visceral
Yeah.
connection of Jews to the land of Israel, or I would say Israel, Palestine, our shared, our common land, but it's a real thing. It's not something you can say, oh, well, let's just toss it aside and we'll focus on life in the diaspora. And again, the Holocaust fits into this too, because that's what the Jewish Labor Bund was saying. We'll be citizens of Poland, and we'll help Poland come to the next level. And the next thing you know, they're gone, they're killed, and so there's again, I've chosen to build my life in the diaspora. I should say too. It's not I lived in Israel. I came back. I'm a diaspora Jew, but I have to acknowledge that the land of Israel is at the core of Judaism and of Jewish identity. And to try to take that away, I think, is a big mistake.
Mm.
And that's been true, going back, as I said, even before it goes back to Abraham. I mean, after all, he was told by God to go get up and leave Ur and go there, and then the Exodus from Egypt and all that. I mean, it's core. I mean, to
Yeah.
dismiss that, I think, is a big mistake.
Yeah. So where do we go from here? Talk about the path forward. You said that once you published this article, that very quickly you came to you were able to see that this is going to lead towards a movement. This is just the first step in a long process. What initiatives can people of conscience, people of all faiths undertake to strengthen our bonds between American Jews and non-Jews, but also in general?
Right. And by the way, Sabeeha, before I answer that, I want to say that the fact that you've been inspired by Jewish Voice for Peace and some of those folks, I totally get that, and that's and respect that deeply, and so that's an important thing. But I'm criticizing them for some of the reasons.
Yeah, of course.
So, but that also gets to the point that if we're going to make something of post-Zionism, of my new project, it's it's brand new and we're a tiny minority. So the one thing we should not do is be stuck in our little silo. Like we won't talk to this one. We won't talk to. We need to be talking first of all within the Jewish community to Zionists and anti-Zionists and see what areas can we work together and what areas can we not work together. As I said, with the left Zionists, some of the people in Rosanna and J Street and many other organizations, and probably within the Reform movement and other places, and JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, many people get it, and that's the conservative movement, by the way. And so we need to work together because there's so much we need to do.
Sometimes it is the labels that create walls. But if the focus is on the values and on the end goal, do away with the labels, know what is it that is important to you in terms of your values, that can be a springboard for a movement.
Right. So I think, we need to work in two areas. One is, and some of this certainly with the left Zionists, and maybe some of the anti-Zionists. I mean, certainly working to do whatever can be done to change the outlook in Israel, maybe starting even with this election. And I'm not suggesting that the other parties besides Netanyahu are even remotely on where they need to be in terms of even dealing with the needs for Palestinian self-determination. I mean, they're just still all pretending like that issue doesn't exist. So, but nevertheless, getting this government out, because I think, and I'm also, I want to say, I am what has happened as you and I know in the last couple of days, the Iran agreement has been decided. Netanyahu's grand conceit that he would, bring Trump along and that they would blow up Iran and they would, that he really was selling the Israeli people a bill of goods that he could just so overawe the Middle East and the Arab world and the Muslim world with Israel's might, that was the answer, and that's really been blown away by what happened with this Iran war, this really stupid war that, with all of that sophistication, that they were that stupid, he and Trump, to somehow think that was going to work. Now he's got to be very careful Trump doesn't come down on him, because if he doesn't stop the really horrible things he's doing in Lebanon, it could really blow up on Israel, lose their last friend, essentially. But I'm digressing. Anyway, we need to work very hard on that, and we also have a huge amount to do. We do live, those of us who are in the U.S. and in the diaspora, we're living in a country that's on itself on the verge of fascism, and we have to, and democracy is threatened. We see the rise of white Christian nationalism, which is a terrible threat to Jews and Muslims and all folks of minority backgrounds and ethnic, as well as racial, as well as religious. So there's a lot to do, and we have to work, all of us together, while upholding the truth as we see it.
Okay. Amen to that. Thank you, Walter. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your courage, for your words of wisdom. And thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful summer. Be safe and be well.
Thank you, Sabeeha. Thank you to all, and very excited for what comes next.